Welcome, everyone. This is the Electric School Bus Network California Forum. Today is February the 7th. Today, we're going to be talking about utility engagement and kind of specifically some solutions around infrastructure. We have a great crew of panelists here for you today, representing the Mobility House, the World Resources Institute Electric School Bus Initiative, and Scale Microgrids. So we're going to have a few kind of housekeeping things before we introduce the panelists, but today, if you've been on our forums before, today is slightly different in that we're going to have a big section where we talk to our panelists because we think this is a very interesting topic to delve into. So let's get started. So this is our agenda for today. We always do a quick introduction to the Electric School Bus Network. Just going to touch on a few funding updates, both California and federally, and then we'll dive right into our topic that we're going to be discussing today. And then, we always encourage conversation throughout. So you can use the chat on the on your screen. I guess I'm not sure where it is on everyone's screen, or you can raise your hand and we'll kind of say unmute yourself, and you can join the conversation. And then we'll do a quick closing at the end, kind of recap and make sure you're aware of everything that's going on moving forward. All right, so if you're not familiar, the Electric School Bus Network is a kind of a network that CALSTART has created in partnership with a few others, including HVIB, that we do to bring you all together to have conversations around important topics in electric school bus adoption. So we do hold these meetings every other month for California and the opposite months nationally. And we talk about a variety of different topics. You may or may not be familiar. Our team, I feel like, is growing every day. We just had to update this slide today. This is our full school bus team here at CALSTART, representing both our project or technical assistance side of the team that I manage, as well as the programmatic side that Michelle Hansen manages. So I think almost all of these staff are on the call today, since we are talking on the California Forum. I do want to maybe shout out to Skylar. She's the newbie on our team. She's helping to manage some of the California incentive programs. So I don't know, Skylar, if you want to come off mute or say hi if you're on the call yet.
I am, yes. Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Skylar Ptasic, as Rachel mentioned, I'm new on the electric school bus team, and I come from a nonprofit and utility background. Previous to my role at CALSTART, I was working at Xcel Energy on the clean transportation team and managing some light duty vehicle and charging infrastructure rebate programs. So really happy to be here at CALSTART and delving into the electric school bus world.
Thanks, Skylar. Yeah, some of you that may be familiar with Xcel programming might recognize Skylar's name. She is helping on our incentives team in California. So you may come across her again if you're applying for some of our incentive programs that we manage. All right, a few things to make note of. I mentioned that we sort of alternate between the National Forum and the California Forum here. This is obviously the California Forum, but next month we have a National Forum and they sort of alternate going forward. We usually skip summer because most of us have other things we're doing in the summer, and school districts tend to not want to sit at a computer any more so than they do during the school year. So we have a few of those coming up that we'll share specifically at the end, the dates on. And then I also want to note, since this is our California audience, that CALSTART is going to have some pretty big presence at the CASTO conference coming up later this month. So we do have a session in partnership with CARB where we're going to be talking about school bus specific funding. Please, join the session and participate if you're there. We're also, as always, going to have an HVIB booth where we're going to be, specifically sharing information on all of the incentives. And then this year we're planning a fun ride and drive event as well. So hopefully if you're attending CASTO that you're going to see us at some point in one of these three areas of the conference. Okay, and then I want to delve into just a few updates on funding. So specifically around California, I want to make note that there is a policy clarification on the small fleet voucher amounts for school buses. You will get a recording of this. You'll also get this slide deck. So this is a hyperlink, but we can also send that in the thank you email. If you are applying for standard HVIB, please make note of this clarification. It it involves kind of the doubling and the stacking of funds and things like that.
For a walk. We go for a walk. Come on, let's go.
Oh, Diego, could you please mute yourself?
My bad.
Thank you. And then just a quick update on the public school bus set aside / joint energize application. That application did close in kind of mid-December. There is a priority list available. If you're on that list, it doesn't guarantee funding. So just note of that. That is also a hyperlink that you can access here. Kind of where they're at in that process. They're currently accepting and reviewing Part B applications, and then there is that upcoming deadline in March for the infrastructure portion of it. So if you are kind of one of those applicants that went through before the 15th, please make sure you know kind of where you're at in that process of that incentive program funding. And then some more exciting news around incentives in California. The state of California, so in partnership with CARB and the California Energy Commission, they will be releasing some funding sometime this spring, likely in May, which will be called ZESB, or Zero Emission School Bus and Infrastructure Program. The state has allocated about $500 million in funding, again, for both buses and infrastructure. So if you're looking for yet another funding opportunity for school bus electrification in California, kind of keep your eyes and ears open for this one. I know CARB has some working groups coming up around it. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to be at the CASTO conference as well. So you'll be able to talk directly with CARB there. Quick pause. Any questions on California incentive funding? I know it looks like Juan dropped some links in the chat. Specific to the ones that I mentioned on the slide deck. Thank you so much, Juan. Looks like someone's going to be at Casto. Great. Excited to see you. Okay, I'll move on. If you do end up having questions around any of these incentive programs, you can email the school bus team at calstart.org, and it'll show up at the end of this slide deck as well, in case you forget that email address. And then some quick federal funding updates. Make note of the commercial clean vehicle tax credits that are available. This is also a hyperlink to the IRS, which has a lot of great information out there. They've been having a few webinars on this, and there's a few kind of different channels. I think they have some office hours as well. So if you have purchased electric buses or are about to purchase, please make sure that you're informed on the tax credits available to you. A little bonus incentive money there. And then if you have not heard, but I know that they've been shouting this from the rooftops, the current round of the Clean School Bus program, the rebates that are available right now are available until February 14th. That deadline was extended, so you have a few more days to get your application in. Any questions on federal funding? White crew today. I hope this doesn't translate to the panel. Okay, we should all be aware of these things, right? I'm sure you've got 1,000 emails in your inbox that say these exact same things, but we're just bringing it to the surface for you. Okay, so our topic for today, as I mentioned, is utility engagement and infrastructure solutions. We're seeing a lot, in the media and kind of just chatter about the infrastructure portion of electric school bus adoption, some of the challenges that we're seeing there, and school districts maybe being frustrated or not knowing kind of what they can do to improve that process or to even better understand that process. So we have a few panelists here today that are kind of experts in this area, though they may not consider themselves that. So we really want to bring to you a conversation around infrastructure solutions and what you can do if maybe your utility says you don't have enough capacity to electrify maybe as fast as you'd like, or as many buses as you'd like in the time frame you're allotted, or maybe you received some funding and are having trouble on the infrastructure side of things and working with your utility. So hopefully this will be a valuable conversation. I would say not just for school districts today, but kind of everybody in the industry to get a refresher on what that process looks like working with a utility, and maybe some things you aren't aware of that could help bring solutions to what your challenge is at your school district. So before we jump into the Mobility House, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to let Bobby from WRI share his slides.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Let's see if that goes through. Let's do that PowerPoint. Is that coming through?
Looks good on my end.
Wonderful. So yeah, hi everyone. Bobby Stafford here from WRI at the Electric School Bus Initiative. Just real quick background on who we are, what we do. First off, the initiative was established with funding from the Baseless Earth Fund, working together to provide an equitable transition to electric school buses. The goal of the initiative is really to build unstoppable momentum towards an equitable transition of the U.S. school bus fleet. Hopefully by 2030 is our aim there. We have a whole lot of resources. It's a pretty big team. We put out a lot of information. All of it is at the URL right there, electricschoolbusinitiative.org. If you search it, we'll come up pretty quick. Tons of information on there. Really encourage you to go check it out. And as for kind of just what our general theory of the case is, we really work to, center equity concerns, center communities, center school districts, but then also have a lot of other groups within our team that focus on policymaking, manufacturing. I'm on our team that handles a lot of utility engagement. Previously, before I came to WRI, back in October, was at San Diego Gas and Electric. So, a lot of time spent in the utility sphere, really enjoy it. But that's all my slides. I can stop sharing and pass it back to you, Rachel.
All right, thanks, Bobby. Let's see, it's still.
Where's there we go.
I know, I'm like, I can't
I'm
share
like, it's
yet.
somewhere
There
around
we
here.
go. All right, can everyone see my slides now?
Yep.
Great. All right, Sam, you're up.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Thanks to CalSTART for having me today. It's a great panel. I think it's sort of like one of, if not the leading topic in electric school bus, in the electric school bus sector, as well as just the electrification in general, is kind of, what fleets can do to overcome challenges related to the distribution grid and limited capacity. Go to the next slide here. Just do a quick introduction of Mobility House. I see a lot of familiar names on this meeting, but for those that don't know me or the company, we are a global company founded in 2009. We're headquartered in Munich, Germany. We have a long-term focus on vehicle grid integration, whether that is full vehicle to grid or just smart charging, optimizing fleets charging around time of use rates or even distribution capacity challenges, which I'll talk about. We're doing a lot of cool stuff in that arena, but what we'll really be focused on today is our smart charging capability. And we have a product called Charge Pilot, which is a charging management system designed for fleets. We do a lot of work in school bus as well as transit bus in the US. Next slide. So just a little more background on Charge Pilot. These are kind of 6 things that charge management systems could help you with, whether it's Charge Pilot or another. And of these, right, that one right in the middle, the site has limited power. That's really the focus today. And that is where I think in the last year, we've seen a really big shift in the way that utilities are treating this technology. There's a lot of standards development around this. How do you really get to a point where you have a charge management system that is reliable enough to meaningfully impact the physical design, the electrical design of the site. And once you get to that point, you open up a lot of possibility to overcome grid constraints. Next slide. So the term I think folks are probably familiar with, but if not, then it's important to become familiar with is automated load management. And I put a definition here from Vehicle Grid Integration Council. But I think the important stuff is highlighted in blue, and really this idea that with ALM, which is sort of a feature or capability of a charge management system, you can get to a point where you can have a nameplate charging capacity that exceeds the rated capacity of the customer connection. And this could be, a sub panel or a main panel, or even increasingly a utility transformer or other piece of utility equipment. So this is what we're going to be diving into, and I'll pass it off to Tim. can skip through all these. They're here just in case someone
I've got
asks
some
me a hard
extra
question.
slides in case. Visual slide. Yeah. All right, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I appreciate CalSTART for having me on here. You know, we're a little bit of a different type of use case here. So scale microgrids by itself. We're a distributed energy platform. We have two pieces within the company. We have a capital solutions side, which is really our financing side, that we have the ability to actually finance our own projects. And then the microgrid solution side, which is where I sit, which is deploying these microgrid solutions out in the market in multiple different areas. We have operating assets in both university situations as well as building a couple different e-mobility projects within California. And the school bus market is another thing that I think as we're scaling up, we're seeing more and more infrastructure issues. So if you want to go to the next slide. So to kind of start off here, what is a microgrid? We consider a microgrid really just a collection of energy assets that you have the ability to pull away from the grid when it makes sense. And so when we think about microgrids, we mostly think about resiliency, the ability to start up and provide power when that utility drops off. Now, what we are talking about on this one is specifically when that utility is not maybe able to provide as much power as you need. And it is a similar vein that we're able to say, okay, if we're able to add energy assets to a site, we're actually able to increase the amount of charging and fleet availability that site can have, because we're essentially removing some of the reliance from the utility. We don't always suggest that, you know, someone goes completely off grid. We want to use the utility where we can, but we should kind of meet them in the middle and say what is available, pull that off, and then be able to essentially optimize on top of that. And so what this graph kind of shows is really the scale that a distributed energy microgrid type of project can really go from. On the left side, the EV infrastructure piece is what Sam was just talking about, where you're able to essentially use these chargers on site to be able to control them in a way that you're able to get essentially a higher output out of them than maybe the nameplate says. And so you're able to really efficiently control those assets in that way. As you go to the right here, you're adding more and more energy assets like battery storage and solar and maybe even a backup generator. Really what scale focuses on is that second or the next 2 to 3 boxes here, because what we're able to do is kind of add these energy assets to the site on top of what Sam and Mobility House are able to provide on the flexible managed charging side. And we're able to kind of add even more flexibility to it. So we're able to add energy generation or battery storage that can help optimize and actually get a higher throughput for those vehicles. And so what you're able to do is you're actually able to do more and increase your electrification at these sites while having the same amount of utility service on the front end. If you want to go to the next one. So as I mentioned, the resilience piece is pretty big right here. And I'm not trying to, you know, add fear or anything, but we did just kind of go through this in California and understanding all these power outages that are happening. I think it's an unfortunate consequence of the world that we're going to live in for the next good amount of years, probably the rest of our years. And I think one of the most important things is really understanding that the service that we are providing when we're electrifying our transportation system is it's very important that that thing has the ability to operate regardless of if these electricity sources are available at that time. And so microgrids and distributed energy have the ability to kind of add a buffer zone there where you have the ability to have a backup source of energy or maybe a redundant source of energy. And that really allows you to de-risk this type of transition where you're not relying entirely on a utility or a grid that might not be able to provide power 24/7. The next piece is stable fuel costs. So with as you add distributed energy to a site, you're actually adding an energy source that doesn't require a fuel input. And so the best way to think about that is we're actually able to create a really stable cost of energy over the lifetime of that system. And so when you look at it from a fleet perspective, that means that your input of fuel costs is actually very steady over the next 10 to 20 years of that asset. It's very different than gas prices that are going up day to day. We're able to actually create a more stable profile of predictability when it comes to that electricity cost. And then the last piece is the ownership of fuel supply. So as we are growing into this market where more and more programs are available to participate, like demand response and V2G and all these different things that are coming into this new market that are now connecting the transportation piece with the electricity piece, it can get very complicated. And having a partner there that can kind of come in and help support and really own that fuel supply chain for a customer is going to be really beneficial, because partners that are able to do that are really able to pick and choose and really get those value streams into your project without you really having to understand exactly what makes sense and at what site and at what magnitude can I participate in these different types of programs. And then I think I'll stop there, and I look forward to having a conversation.
Great. Okay, we do have just kind of a slide to see every panelist's name in case you have questions throughout. I will say I know this can be a complicated topic and also really detailed depending on your specific scenario. We are going to kind of start 101 and just talk a little bit about what that like school district utility relationship is, and then kind of push it and get into the weeds as far as you guys all would like to. I'll say that. So as always, I mentioned this earlier, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, raise your hand. We want this to be an open conversation. You'll notice this is a meeting, this isn't a webinar, so you can see everyone in the room. Please treat this as if you are all in the room together. So to start off with, I think, let's briefly touch on, maybe Bobby, if you want to cover this question, but others feel free to jump in. Kind of what does that current process look like for a school district to engage with a utility when they're looking to electrify?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think so. It looks a couple different ways, right? And I think there's in particular a lot of lessons learned from different stories that I think can push us towards kind of a more unified approach there, of talking to your utility really, really early, right? You know, when you have the thought in your head to electrify your fleet, you should be talking to your utility already. And utilities, you know, they can be a little difficult to manage, right? Large organizations, different people to talk to. Usually you're going to be able to find one person there who, you know, you can start to talk to, and from there you can find the right match in, you know, what different program you want to work with. I know we were talking with SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, recently, and they were saying that, you know, a lot of these programs get pushed over into their medium heavy duty fleet electrification program. So that's like a really good place to start. In particular, though, they'll tend to have funding for those programs set out to help you know, school districts make any necessary upgrades, anything like that. But they are competing against things like, you know, delivery services, UPS, things like that. So like getting your foot in the door early while there's still money, really great thing. Also point out, I know I had the link there. The ESB initiative puts out a fair amount of documents. I'll link a few of them here that are just like good places to start. My boss is actually on YouTube video, and one or two of these just talking about like what to look at around your site. You know, different ways that you can even like think about you know, improving the efficiency of your site, changing out LEDs, lowering your overall site load, and yeah, some different things to be able to just kind of get yourself in the right headspace for what that electrification journey is going to look like. But yeah, I think if I, you know, the too long version of that is talk to your utility early, find someone to talk with and to work through, and it's going to help that process a lot.
Great. And Sam,
Yeah.
Tim, anything you want to add?
I definitely have a couple of thoughts to share. I think like this is a great question, because I think that you know, in a lot of formats, school districts are getting an advice of, you know, you should talk to your utility early, and I think that is certainly key. And I think utilities are you know, they have resources available, they have people to work with, and so, you know, especially school districts that are under resource, you know, like this is your side thing to build your infrastructure, the rest of your job is getting kids to school, like, you know, just getting a good contact to the utility can be really helpful. And I've seen that play out with school districts in California, especially because the utilities in California are a little bit more mature in the support that they offer. But I do want to offer some additional thoughts on, like, kind of for school districts that want to take more ownership of the process. I think there's some key things, because talking to utility early is useful, but you may not really know what that means or how to like really maximize those conversations. So I think the first thing, and I'll try to be quick here, but just to go through a couple of steps, but I think the first thing is like understanding how the process traditionally works, right? So generally, if you want to add load to the grid, if you're building a new building, if you're adding charging stations, you're going to submit a load letter. And once you submit a letter, the utility is going to assess your request and they're going to say yes or no. Generally, if they say no, you have to put in a new request or, change your request. But it's a little bit of a guess and check methodology, which can be challenging because it's, resource intensive on the school district to, keep coming up with a new request. Now, there have been some updates to that process. So in California, there's 3 different ways that you could do this. One is just a standard load letter. Second is to go through the utility make ready program, which Bobby was talking about, which all of the IOUs have. And then the third would be Rule 29, which is a newer method, but you're actually able to just request an EV only service in California, and the utility will pay for everything on their side of the meter if you go through this new tariff. You don't get any money for infrastructure on your side of the meter like you would in a make ready program, but there can be benefits to having the freedom to do that on your side. So for example, Mobility House is working on some V2G projects now in Northern California, and we prefer to go through Rule 29 because we want to control the timelines on the customer side and work with the school district. So there's a couple different options, and understanding that whole world of possibilities will really help school districts be more informed, because they could go into a make ready program that could be perfect for them. But if they don't know the other options, they may end up there, or you may end up there, just because you think that's the only option. So it could be a great one, but I think it's nice to know that there's other pathways to adding new service. So I think that's super key. And then the last point I would add too is, with some of the technologies we'll be talking about today, you may have an ability, especially if you have a grant to fund buses and you have buses showing up sooner than you expected or on a certain timeline, you may have the ability to kind of flip the question. And instead of saying, hey, I'm getting 10 buses, 10 chargers, can you do this? You may be able to ask utilities, how much capacity do I have? And then see if that will work for your operations. So instead of this guess and check, you can actually come at it from another way. Utilities aren't used to doing that. I could talk sort of about the resources that are available for districts to try to flip the question, but I do think that's really important. And I have some stories that I can share later to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That was very informative, and thanks, Bobby. So thinking about that, depending on what you're saying is depending on when you're engaging with your utility, there might be benefits to either kind of which lane you can work with your utility in, or sort of avoiding making a decision in those lanes. And if you go early enough, you might just be able to kind of back into how quickly you can electrify your fleet. Does that sound kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think there's a lot of what I see happening is school districts will end up running 2 processes at the same time. They'll end up running like a near term, oh my God, I got money for buses, I got to spend this. How many chargers can I put in? And then at the same time, they might be doing a longer term process to figure out, all right, do I want to do make ready? Do I want to do Rule 29? What's the best pathway for me to get a large service, 1, 2 megawatt service to charge my buses in 2035 when I have 100% electric. So you kind of have this dual pathway. Yeah.
Great. I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
No, I was gonna echo Sam's point that like we've worked with school districts and like heard stories of, right, the buses are coming in the door, setting up level 2 charging, and that like even some of the school district, like you can service a lot of bus demand on lower level charging, but we have seen a lot of school districts that, they install the level 2 charging because that's what they can get right then. And then as time goes on, they're upgrading that service, like Sam is saying, to be able to be a little more flexible, charge faster, charge at different times, do different things. So yeah, right, there's no one approach to this. And so yeah, right, finding the right kind of mix of those different options and just kind of looking at what the ground is around you is definitely really important.
Yeah, so you both kind of brought up sort of this near term and then potentially more of a bigger picture far term. So I think most of us, if not all of us in this room, are aware that California does have an electric school bus adoption mandate. And so school districts really do need to think about, long term, how am I going to get my entire fleet electrified? And with that comes obviously a much greater load necessary from the grid than maybe one or two buses or even 10 buses that they have received recently through a grant funding. So and maybe Sam, if you want to touch on this, or Bobby, kind of what are your recommendations for a fleet that knows they need to electrify long term, sort of some steps they can take, or maybe where, how do I want to say this, when should they implement maybe some of these different technologies to help them get to full electrification? So Bobby mentioned, starting with level 2s and then maybe growing. Kind of what do you see that trajectory looking like for a fleet?
Yeah, I can start on that. I would actually recommend the dual pathway that I just talked about, because certainly you would want to do some sort of fleet electrification assessment. You're going to need route data for that. That's probably the most important thing, to understand your current bus operations, and from there you can figure out which buses are a good fit, how much charging do I need, and there's plenty of consultants and other folks that can help you model what your long-term power needs are going to look like. But I've worked with a lot of fleets, a lot of school districts, and there's really no replacement for getting a few buses and starting to test it at the same time, right? So I think you could do a plan, you could spend 18 months planning, and there's just so many questions that might remain after that, because you don't have experience with this new technology in your operations, and everyone's operations are different, right? So you end up 18 months in and you're not really sure what to do because you don't have any hands-on. So getting a few chargers, getting a few buses going, and as you do the longer term plan, I think is what I've seen to be effective. And there's, with the right software, obviously that's where I'm coming from, there's ways that you can bridge that gap on a charging side, so that when you put in your first 2 chargers, they don't have to be ripped out or anything. They can easily transition into a longer term situation, and the charge management can get you a long way. At some point, you probably, physics will determine you need an upgrade, or you need to work with Tim and get some more power generation on site.
Great. I know we have a hand up, but Bobby, did you want to elaborate on that or anything, or even Tim, if you want
to? No, I think few thoughts, and really appreciate what you said, Sam. But I think too, this is my headspace, right? I worked at utility for a long time. That when you're going through those processes, there are also things that you can do along the way to kind of make small upgrades while you're digging, while you're doing things to better protect yourself for future proofing, right? You can upsize some of the just kind of civil equipment, not the electrical equipment necessarily, just put more tubes in the ground and bigger holes. And that's going to be a little bit of a charge now, but really help down the line as you're expanding out that fleet, because what utilities aren't going to, or your utility isn't going to overbuild your system typically, right? That's against their mandate. And so if you're going through and saying, okay, we have this project coming online now, but in 10, 20 years, we think we're going to have this going, or not even that, right? 2035 is coming up very quick, 10 years. We're going to have this much more load on there. Talking with your utility now about what that is going to look like, and also saying, hey, we can expand this project a little bit now, is going to make it easier down the road. But it might be the case that in order to service that load, you're going to need a substation upgrade, right? You're going to need a massive amount of power brought online. And that's a really long process. So like getting the ball rolling on that earlier, doing those assessments to figure out what the future is going to look like is going to be really important.
Yeah. Thanks, Bobby. Tim, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to add something?
The only thing I would really add here, so what we're working on, like, so these are transitions, right? So it's not everything shows up at once. It's not everything shows up in 5 years. We're really trying to figure out what happens in between those gaps. And from our perspective, we are actively engaging with the utilities on adding these distributed energy resources like to these sites. And so when we have these conversations, we're already engaged in the same type of conversation that kind of happens when you're going in and saying, I have this amount of charging infrastructure, this is the amount of power that I'm expecting. And so we're able to kind of gauge these conversations to understand exactly how we could help with things like solar and battery storage to actually help this transition. One example is we're actually working with the transit authority. So this is on a much larger magnitude of power in one site. But what we're able to do is actually put a solar storage microgrid on the first phase and then build it in a way that they actually don't have to go get more capacity every time they add more vehicles. So we built it in a way to actually add more battery storage to the site over time, and they can actually use the same exact service size throughout their entire transition. And that's like an opportunity that when you have these other levers that we kind of come in and try to add, which is the battery storage and the solar piece, you can actually think of it slightly differently, where your planning isn't entirely based on the utility's ability to provide a certain level of power. Now you can actually use that as this is my waypoint of, I know they can provide, a certain amount in 5 years and a certain amount in 10 years. How do I do a transition in between there? And we have the ability to kind of look at this and say, well, if you add battery storage now, you can do 15 vehicles now. And if you add battery storage in the 5th year, you can maybe do an additional 20 vehicles sooner than waiting for that utility to come back around. And I think it's a very complicated process of trying to think through that. But really the best way to think about it is, if you have the ability to add storage and solar to a site, you're generally going to have a better outcome than relying entirely on the utility to bring that power. And there are different ways to kind of skin that cat, but we can kind of work with everybody's unique circumstances to kind of come with the plan.
Yeah, it sounds like there's kind of multiple ways to future-proof, not just in the infrastructure, the actual chargers themselves and that side of the infrastructure, but also even in kind of the microgrid and the support around it. Okay, we do have a few audience questions. I want to, Christine, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
For Rachel. So I'm in Humboldt County, pretty rural, very northern. We're already impacted as far as what our utility provider, which is PG&E, can provide in parts of our county. We have 32 small districts inside of Humboldt County. I'm actually at the Humboldt County Office of Education, which kind of is the umbrella over all these districts. Most of these have no designated transportation person. And it's all and those that do, there's like four or five of us that have a designated transportation official, supervisor, director, or whatever you want to call it, that's in charge of this process. And I haven't heard a single person not admit that this is a very complicated process. So that being said, with all the billions of dollars that the state of California is trying to throw at us, and everyone I know is struggling to make this happen. Have they considered, or is there a plan in place to get us some help, some boots on the ground person that makes this happen, that coordinates the effort between the utility company? I mean, we can all buy buses. I'm friends with several of the people and went to classes with several of the people on this webinar. And I know that most of them don't have the capacity, and you guys do. Why can't you guys put some money in the help with actually making this happen?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. Very glad that you could join today. We haven't seen a lot kind of in your position participate in these forums, so really excited for that. I'm not sure if someone from CARB is on this. A lot of times they are. I'm not gonna like call them out to answer that, but I will say this is the type of feedback that CARB is really looking for in when they are designing these incentive programs, which currently they are in the middle of designing ZESB right now. So I would say, and we can share this in our follow-up email. They will have some working groups in the near future. If you're going to be at Casto, please bring this up there, that you are really looking for. It sounds like some more boots on the ground, some more technical assistance that can help with your specific scenario. So I think this isn't uncommon. We have heard this, across the country. I'm sure Bobby can echo that as well, that, there just really isn't the expertise in all kind of in every school district, in every scenario. And so I know that the industry folks, so, Sam and Tim are there to help, and many others I'm sure that are on this call. But understanding that you might want someone that isn't directly tied to a product or a service. So please provide that feedback to CARB so that they know that that's something that you're all looking for. Molly, I know you have your hand up as well.
Good morning. This is Molly Johnson. I am an air quality specialist with the Placer County Air Pollution Control District. And we give grants to school districts in Placer County, both for electric school buses and charging infrastructure. And we help school districts sort of develop, with my limited knowledge, to develop a fleet electrification plan, because as the previous person commented from Humboldt, I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name, I think Christine,
Yep.
There are very limited resources that we find in school districts in order to be able to do this work. A lot of time it is the transportation director who is, their first and foremost responsibility is to get kids back and forth from home to school every day. And then to pile this on top of them. And it is, it's something that's, very technologically advanced. There's lots of considerations, lots of variables, and lots of things to consider. And so I just want to sort of echo the previous comment, but I would also like to add that, so I heard someone talk about sort of route data evaluation and needs assessments in order to determine what the power available is needed for a site, or what the capacity a site needs for their charging infrastructure. As well as a big question that I have is, does a district get level 2 or DC fast chargers? And if they get DC fast, how many do they get? And I hear, like I said, I hear about these consultants that are out there available to do this work and provide this information. But I'm curious, I'd like to find out more about who they are, and also find out where school districts get funding in order to have these services provided, because we find that they're not willing, we cannot identify funding that's available. The district is not willing to put forward these upfront costs. There's plenty of funding available for buses and infrastructure, but we have yet to identify where this funding is in order to be able to do this planning where it's available to school districts.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Thanks for joining too. Shout out to Molly. We're going to be planning another ride and drive event this year with Molly. So looking forward to that. We'll announce that on a future one of these. But to your point, so that was Sam that mentioned that. I guess the planning assistance that we're kind of referencing right now is usually done, and please panelists, correct me if I'm wrong on here, or if you know of other sources. I think a good place to start is the dealer or the OEM that you typically work with, or you're interested in working with for electric school buses. They're a lot of times kind of that first point of contact for a district, but also companies like the Mobility House, charging companies that may be on this call, they can all kind of provide some level of that analysis work. So if you're interested in getting 10 buses, they can kind of run that analysis of how much infrastructure you would need to run those said 10 buses. So, and they'll do that just kind of as part of their service to working with you as a district. And then as far as identifying a specific funding source, I'll just say TBD, look out for our future forums. There might be some information coming soon on that. Go ahead, Sam, you came off mute.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, certainly, you know, industry folks are happy and to provide some level of analysis, you know, as part of the sales process. And, you know, again, a humble plug for the charging software companies of the world, right? If you're working with someone that's agnostic to charger type, then, you know, they're not going to be as certainly not as neutral as a consultant or you know, CALSTART, a nonprofit providing technical assistance. But, you know, companies like mine and others are not tied to a single hardware, so we're not going to push you towards, you know, 2 types of chargers. So there's some flexibility there, and so those, like, we provide charging simulations and have a little consulting capability as part of our like offering, and do that at, you know, at no cost for folks. And, you know, this is Rachel, I know you just alluded to something, but doing a lot of work in New York, you know, they have specific state technical assistants. They have a list of consultants that do these types of studies. And so it sounds like maybe, yeah, something California should to look at. As East Coast bias over here, we can learn from that side of the country as well.
Yes, I won't share what New York is doing necessarily on this call, though you're correct, Sam. And then I'll give a shout out to WRI, because I know Bobby just came off as well. They do play in this arena as well, and have, as he mentioned, a lot of resources. And I'm not sure kind of if they're taking on additional fleets specifically, but I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, so I'm not as sure about specific fleets. I think a lot of our work tends to, you know, there are school districts that we've partnered with to kind of like go through their process a little more, but mostly to take their lessons and disseminate that. I think, you know, a plug for our own things, like a few of those links I shared, particularly the second one, that power planner document. You know, my boss put a lot of time and thought into kind of going through step by step what a lot of those questions you need to be asking are. And that's a completely free document. It's out there, the link's in the chat. And, you know, I think if you think you need more help beyond that, right, absolutely, like, you know, finding different groups to be able to do that. But I think that's a really great place to start, to just be able to say, like, okay, here are some of the things that I need to be thinking about, need to be asking, and to see whether that's something that you can handle or whether that's something that you need to outsource.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, there are 2 links in the chat. Well, one of those is the power planner that Bobby dropped. I know we're running low on
those. Thank you for those resources.
Yes, great. And we can send those in the follow-up email as well. So we are running low on time. I want to kind of touch on one thing. Sort of as a school district is looking to electrify, we talked about this, there is kind of that long-term mandate out there. When should they be considering things like managed charging and a microgrid, you know, kind of touching on Sam and Tim here. At what point in the game should they be considering that? Is that after 10? Is it, you know, way long earlier than that, when they're just having a conversation with the utility? How do they know when maybe that might be the right solution for them? I don't know, Sam, do you want to
go? I think of this as kind of a continuum. So yeah, I could start, and then I'll
yeah, let's talk about that continuum.
I'll set you up here, Tim.
There we go.
Yeah, I'll set you up here. So yeah, I think, you know, we have now 6 minutes to talk about probably something that should be 2 hours. So definitely hit us up after. But you know, certainly, right, if you have enough power capacity, you have, you know, simple electrical rates, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 buses, maybe you don't need any managed charging. You just plug them in, you're good to go. But, you know, especially if you're contending with limited power, and I've seen in parts of California where you can't even put 1 or 2 chargers without running into issues, you know, managed charging can be useful right from the beginning. And, you know, with this ability to oversubscribe a panel, which is allowed for in the National Electric Code, so happy to share resources there, then you could put in, your initial round of chargers on whatever capacity you have. We do modeling to say, all right, you only have, 80 kilowatts available. You could put in, enough chargers for 14 buses to be plugged in at once, but we will make sure you never exceed that 80. And that's probably something you might need from day one. We have stories of folks getting grants and buying, handful of buses, and they need that right away. Once you have that layer of intelligence on your chargers, once you have that charge management system, maybe you get an upgrade, or maybe you need more power. Like, you have everything you need to add DERs, right? To add in a microgrid as you start to expand. So it kind of sets you up, it future proofs your technology. And yeah, I think Tim, you can jump in there.
Yeah, and this is kind of why we like working with Mobility House, because it makes a lot of sense for how we try to transition between these two. So microgrids aren't going to make sense for 2 or 3 vehicles. You're putting in a lot of infrastructure for not a lot of energy. As you scale up, there's a certain point that it starts to make sense. From my opinion, like the charging management system piece of this, the Mobility House piece, it makes sense very early on. It makes sense right away. As soon as you hit a certain amount that you can kind of pay for that service, it's going to get a return. We sit a little bit further down the line, where as you get to the point that you maybe hit critical mass within the amount of vehicles in your fleet, where resiliency is now a requirement for these vehicles, or you're hitting the point where the utility is saying, okay, we don't have much more power for you. That's kind of where that conversation for the microgrid or the DERs kind of starts coming in. Now, the difficult piece is that at that point, you probably should have been thinking about it, a microgrid or DERs, about a year before that, because of the process that it takes to build these projects. We're not showing up and building something in 2 months. It does take us, 8 to 9 months to a year and a half type of planning to get these large scale projects in. And so my suggestion is that at the point that, the charging management system is coming in to make sense, is the point that you start saying, okay, is this something that a microgrid does make sense? Does it add value to my project? And we will come in, there's a lot of projects that we look at and say, our type of application is not going to add any value to your system. And so we suggest just going down the software route. And then there are times that we can come in and kind of say, okay, once you get to this level, which we think is going to be in 2 to 3 years, that's when you should call us. And that's kind of where we think is the best way to have these DER conversations, is once you get past the pilot phase and you start getting into the, I don't have backup buses phase, is really the right time to kind of have the conversation of planning for these distributed energy and really figuring out if it makes sense for you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Sam. Really helpful conversation here. I know we didn't get super far into the weeds. I'll say this, I'm going to wrap up our slides here. We do invite kind of anyone that wants to stick around, if our panelists can stick around and, answer any. Sometimes we get people that want to ask specific questions and don't want to ask them to the full room. Sometimes they just want to get more in the weeds and talk directly with the panelists. So I'll wrap up our slides here. And then, we'll stick around for a few minutes extra if anyone wants to talk further with our panelists. But I do want to say thank you to all of our panelists that participated today and joined us in this conversation. I think there is so much more to unpack here in this conversation, and perhaps we have sort of a follow-up or part 2 to this in the future, so we can maybe showcase some specific examples I think might be helpful. But I'll say thank you to everyone that joined us on the call today as well. If you still have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. As I said, we'll stick around. We can answer some of them. We can even follow up with email. We'll also share all of the panelists' contact information. So if you want to reach out directly and ask them specific questions for your scenario, your school bus fleet, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those. A few kind of wrap up things. We will send a follow-up email, which will include the recording of this, as well as the slide deck and a lot of the resources shared today. You should get that on Friday at the very latest, early next week. If you do not, you can reach out and we'll make sure that you got a copy of it. We also send out our monthly newsletter around the second week of the month, so that'll come out next Tuesday as well. And then our next California forum is going to be Wednesday, April 3rd, at the same time that you joined us here today. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to us, you can reach us at schoolbusteam@calstart.org. We're happy to share resources, answer questions, anything that you need. I think that's our last slide. So again, thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today, and feel free to stick around if you want to ask any other questions.